Alfred in the Cavern of Time by Austen Ballard and Robert Strobel. Performed by Austen Ballard. Alfred slowly walked home from his weekly meeting at the Amber's Hand Temple. The worshipping in this area of the land was far different than his hometown, and he was not used to it. But luckily the people here were fairly active and devout, and worshipped the same noble gods as he did. Amber's Hand was a quiet town, but very prosperous, and there was much employment available. It was the main export station for eastern Argonathrazil, and aside from that tourists were often docking in the shipyard and passing through for the night on their way to see Wales, the beautiful county beyond the forest. It was Alfred's first week in Amber's Hand, and he had been obligated to find a job here, though most of the fishing occupations did not suit him well. However, Alfred did not enjoy employment all that much. He was contented to sit near a smelly fish yard near the town, and lay his face into his folded arms. He felt that he should go here, but as he left this forest and the haunts he knew were new nobles that would help him, he was compelled to get a job. Suddenly, he felt somebody touch his arm. "Alfred Shortstaff," said a ringing voice. "Yes," Alfred answered, barely raising his head from his folded arms. Before him stood a short man with balding brown hair and a small scroll in his hand that he had turned his attention to. "Ah, yes, well, I've been meaning to fetch you. You see, the Duke's councillors have heard of your arrival, and it seems you are somewhat well known amongst one of them. Does it seem at all familiar to know someone here?" "It's possible," Alfred sighed, but he stood up and began to follow the man to the large dome-shaped building next to the city hall. "Is this the Duke's house?" asked Alfred, as the man took out a key as they came to the gate of the building. "One of them," quipped the man. "Are you one of his councillors?" "Heavens, no," whistled the man, but he chose not to explain anything. Obviously, this Duke was a rich man, with many maidservants and manservants, many of whom had to be, judging from this man, quite educated. "What's the scroll for?" The man chuckled. "Well, it's your summons, and it has a striking likeness of you in it." It was Alfred's turn to whistle as he saw the picture. Immediately he knew whose crafts that was. "So it was him," said Alfred. "So you do know him?" Alfred chuckled. "We go a long way back, at least a decade. I was a young lad then, and so was he." The Duke finally had a grasp on the door to the Duke's house. A big hall was before him. Alfred and the man walked through a hall to some large doors. The doors were at least twice Alfred's height, and decorated with tiny studs along the border. The man led Alfred inside, then turned left at the doors, and went down another hall about half the length of the previous one. At the end stood a single door with a plaque on it that said, "Entrance forbidden," and, in tinier letters under that, "Privacy and secrecy reserved by his lordship, the Duke of Amber's Hand." The man whom Alfred was with knocked on the door, and a peephole Alfred had not noticed before slid open. A large brown eye peeked through. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to cover your eyes," said the man. Alfred did so, and heard the sound of moving cloth on the man's wrist. The door clicked open. "Thank you for obliging, sir." This must have been somewhat secret, as obviously a certain hand signal was needed for entry, but Alfred paid no heed. Alfred and the man walked into the door. The hall was dimly lit, with silver light filtering in from keyhole-shaped windows on the sides between pillars. In the very center of a huge room was a round marble table with 10 or 12 people around it. 2 of the chairs were empty. The brown-eyed man sat at the chair closest to the door, as all of the councillors looked up at Alfred. Most of the men had short beards of varying colors. Only one man did not have any hair at all, and he stood up graciously.
"Thank you, Mr. Frieder,"
he said in an unbecomingly deep voice.
"Have a seat, Alfred."
Alfred didn't like the hard chair, but he sat directly in front of the bald man.
"Forgive me, Alfred, but I am not at liberty at this time to tell you my name, or the names of any of this council. I will make this visit brief for your sake. The Duke, as you may know, has been stewarding the nearby citadel of Abrinthil, whilst the King was off on a crusade in Orevion. The crusade is over, and the King has returned. However, the Lordship, the Duke, has not. It is not a long journey from Abrinthil, perhaps 2 weeks' travel, through the mountains and Wales, and then the nearby forest. I know you are somewhat new in this town, but Mr. Frieder discovered a passage in the Duke's notes in his office mentioning you, and we have come to the conclusion that you are his only living acquaintance who is young enough to go out and search for him."
Alfred was stunned. Barely a week, and already people looking to him for help here. Alfred thought a moment and said, "Most certainly the one who wrote the scroll must have been the Duke." The bald man looked up at Alfred.
"What scroll?"
he said. Mr. Frider stood up and pointed at the scroll, which was still in his hand. "You means the note script. I rolled it up." "May I see the roll?" asked Alfred. Mr. Frider gladly handed it over to him. Alfred looked at the script. Puzzling. He didn't know if his friend was the Duke, but he couldn't have been. The Duke had a different full name. He couldn't remember the name, though. "But it doesn't even make sense," said Alfred.
"Why ever not?"
said the bald man. "This script belongs to a friend of mine, younger, who has a different name than the Duke's." The bald man suddenly grew tense and shuffled around nervously.
"Do not tell us what you already know about the Duke. We know what the matter was, but we will not speak these things in this room. Imagery is a rare virtue."
Alfred looked up. "Shall I read the script?" The bald man nodded. Alfred read the following. "There are 4 types of magic: good, bad, neutral, and the 4th is anything else. My friend Alfred's short staff is exemplar of the 4th magic. He simply breathes it at his young age. He has visions in the present day as if he is transported there." Suddenly Alfred became dizzy, and suddenly he was floating under an orb of light. At once he saw a hooded man with a dark cape searching for something. He kept saying, "It's not there." And then Alfred was floating in the orb of light for an instant. And then he was in a lighted cave. A strange creature was sitting in front of 2 passageways. The creature opened its big mouth and spoke.
"The right is the way to go. The left is doomed."
The orb came back. Then he saw in the shadows a man tied up, and a shadow over him. At once Alfred found himself in the room again and continued. "And these visions happen instantaneously. He can do a lot of things like this, but most of what he can do he won't reveal to me. Once when we were camping, he inexplicably turned into a deer. Neither I nor Alfred know why that was, but he turned back into himself in an hour or 2. Such things as these are exemplar. He could be turned into a great asset if he mastered his powers." Alfred looked up and grinned at the men. "You don't know a lot about me either." The bald man said nothing. "I've had a vision, probably something pertinent to this quest, during the course of reading this scroll." The bald man remained silent. "I've had things pop into my head that I think are still entirely irrelevant. It might be this way, too. On the other hand, it might be relevant." Finally, the bald man waved his arm.
"Does this mean you accept the quest?"
Alfred nodded. "I think the Duke is in grave danger, but I don't know where to start. Perhaps you people can help me start off on the right foot?" They were silent for a long time. At long last one of the other men, who had a graying but otherwise mud-brown beard, got up from his seat and whispered something to the bald man.
"Very well, Alfred. His lordship the Duke Rothgren of Amber's Hand has enlisted you in his cause, and we, his loyal council, shall help you begin."
He clapped his hands softly, twice with pauses in between, and one sharp clap. A wispy, bearded man, a couple of places to his left, pulled a small scroll from his robe.
"Allow this good man Alfred to stay at the Red Jackal Inn for free tonight. Write a voucher for Gavin, and tell him he need not pay taxes for this week."
The man scribbled dryly with his quill on the parchment. The men passed it down to the bald man, while simultaneously another man from the table fetched a red candle from a low chandelier in the corner and placed it in his other hand. The bald man signed the paper, dripped wax on the fold, and pressed a symbol into it with his ring.
"Please come to the main hall tomorrow, Alfred. We'll have rations and a horse for your journey. I trust you'll need little else, yes?"
Alfred looked into his eyes without saying anything. He was beginning to feel challenged against this man, though he knew not why.
"Thank you, Alfred. Mr. Frider?"
Mr. Frider escorted him outside without a word. End of Chapter 1.